Yeah, hi everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm finally here. I was supposed to be here in March at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was thrilled to get a call to come join you tonight. So I'm going to share my screen, my presentation. Mhm. Mhm. Hold on one second. Hold on. I'm coming. There we go. Someone can give me a thumbs up that this is showing up. Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks. All right, so I'm here tonight to talk to you about executive function or executive skills, and also to give you some tips and tricks for building executive skills while you are schooling from home and working from home and doing all of it. So I'm going to begin just by telling you a little bit about myself. I was a general ed educator for 25 years, and I taught elementary school, middle school, and then I ended up my last few years teaching high school. During that time in general ed, I became the inclusion teacher for most of my time. And that allowed me to have a lot of training and certification to serve different students. So I worked with kids with dyslexia, ADHD, children that are on the spectrum, as well as gifted and talented and twice exceptional. I really think, though, that every kid is unique. And so I was always driven to learn more about how the brain worked. That was really what drove me. Not only that, personally, I have a daughter. She's just started grad school this week online. She is dyslexic and has ADHD. So I came at it also from a parent perspective, my interest in all of it and how to help her. So that's kind of my background. Where I am now is my last few years, I was able to get training from Jody Sleeper Triplet. And a lot of you might have heard of her. She's done a lot of work with ADHD, executive functioning. She trains people like myself to become coaches to work with students, adults, and parents. I My last few years of working in the school system, I was ready to go out on my own. And so that's what I do right now. I have my own business, and I coach students. I also help Jody. I consult with her and I try to take the coaching practices into schools K through 12 and into higher ed. So that's just a little bit about me. Um, to kind of set the stage for today, I started with a quote. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. I love her. I can't get enough of her. And when the pandemic started, her podcast was starting, and she was talking about effing first times, or FFTs. We'll just call them FFTs. And it just resonated with me. And it was explaining everything that I was feeling, because we were going through all these transitions and this newness, and how it was pushing us into these uncomfortable places that we normally don't find ourselves. Well, last week she started her second season, and her whole thing was about day 2. And that really resonated with me, because that's where we all are, is in day 2. Like, it's still all happening. While we did do online learning in the spring, it's still kind of new and messy, because we're having to start the year online, which we've never done before. Not only that, all this stuff is happening around us in the world. It all compounds and makes things messy. But it's also in that messy day 2 where a lot of the work is done, a lot of growth happens, a lot of, I don't know, opportunities to practice. So I kind of want to shift perspectives, and what I'm going to share with you is in that we are in this unprecedented time, but it's a really kind of cool place to grow. I'm hoping that what you might take away is just one thing, whether it's an affirmation of like, okay, I've got this, or some strategy that might help your child, help you. Just one thing, and not anything else is just going to be gravy. I did in the presentation put resources, and there are lots of really good ones at the end of the presentation for you to access, because there's so much good stuff out there right now. I really feel like people have come together to reach out and to help one another. So that will be there for you at the end. So as we're in day 2 and honoring that, I'm going to get started. So I'm going to give a brief overview of executive function, executive skills. I'm thrilled that this is getting out there more and more. More teachers are understanding it. When I started teaching, this wasn't brought up at all. No one talked to teachers about executive functioning or executive skills. It really has been recently, and it has taken off, which is wonderful, because the more you can understand how the brain works and what's happening for a learner, the better you're able to meet their needs where they are. So there are different viewpoints of executive function or executive skills. You might have heard some of these metaphors. Some people say it's like a GPS. It kind of, you know where you're going, you know where you are, and it kind of, all those processes, brain processes, help you get to where you need to be, to turn left, to turn right, to turn around. That's one way of looking at it. Another one is the CEO. That's a metaphor that's used often, where it's all about goal direction, and it's more like telling you what to do. And then the command and control center, same idea, same concepts. I like to talk to my clients about what is happening and kind of what an executive functions are or skills, so that they can put pictures to what it is, and I let them choose whether they think of it as like a GPS system or a conductor. Some kids like to think of it as a conductor. It just depends on whatever visual thing works for them, so they understand what's happening as they're going through setting out to do a task and accomplishing it, because that way they'll be able to figure out where if they go off track, how they need to get back on. I'm going to go over specific skills and give you the language around them and the definition. I'm not going to read it to you, but I use this language a lot. So this is my next couple of slides. I talk to my students this way. When I was in the classroom, I talk to my clients this way. I use this language with parents to help them to understand. These definitions come from Peg Dawson, and so I'm just going to go over them. She kind of breaks it up into 2 different sets of skills. So she breaks it up into kind of problem-solving skills and then behavior skills. I think of the problem-solving skills are more of the thinking, goal setting, the planning part of setting out to do a task. So if you look at the screen, there's the planning and prioritization, organization, time management, working memory. This one I like to explain a little bit. The working memory is being able to hold on to information and then apply it to problem solve. You can have a really great memory and still have working memory issues. So that's what working memory does. Also, metacognition is a big one, and that's what my role really is as a coach, is to help them to develop that metacognition. It's where they stop and they're able to ask themselves questions and reflect on what worked and what didn't, and then take the next course of action. This is all what's needed in when you're developing a plan. The next set of skills are behavior. I'm kind of clumping them all together, because you can have the best laid out plan or goal, or yeah, I'm going to get that done. I'm going to take out the trash after I finish my homework, whatever it is that you're setting out to do. And these guys right here can really get in the way. So when I do a lot of coaching and when I'm working with my clients, a lot of stuff comes up around these guys. So the first one is response inhibition, and that's the capacity to think before you act, to really think, is this really a good idea? How is this going to impact my goal? So for example, if I'm using, just the task to take the trash out after I do my homework. So I'm working on my homework and I get finished, and then all of a sudden I pick up my phone and I start looking at social media. As I'm looking at that social media, I'm not thinking about like, how is this going to impact my goal to take out the trash? I just get absorbed into it, and I'm doing without really thinking about the impact onto others, or to the task. Another big one is emotional control. And especially right now, where this is the ability to feel your feelings, but at the same time manage them and get them to a place where you can problem solve and access those executive skills. So a lot of times with a strong emotional response, it's going to derail everything, and you can't get to those other skills that you need, like time management or response inhibition or starting a task. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more about that later. Another one is sustained attention over time, and task initiation. I will say a little bit about task initiation. Why I love this term so much is it can be difficult to understand, because I will have a parent say to me, well, if they don't need any help getting started on playing a video game. They get right to it. They sustain tension for long periods of time. They don't need any help with that. But if they go to do their homework, then they can't get started. They're procrastinate, or they're just lazy, or they don't want to do it, whatever they've assigned to it. Why I like the word task initiation is it takes some of that out of what's actually happening. When they are very interested in what's going on, it's easier for them to initiate the task. They have the dopamine and everything they need to get started. When it's not a preferred task, then they might have difficulty initiating because they don't have the dopamine and the motivation to get started, or there's a lagging skill and not enough reward to kind of tackle that, or there's a lagging skill that needs to be taught. So task initiation is one that I use a lot, and I have my clients use a lot to kind of move away from terms like lazy or procrastinating, stuff like that. Goal-directed persistence is just what it says, being able to have a goal and stick through all the way to the end, even when difficult things come up in between. So now that we have kind of that common language, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on, how they develop. I always want to point out that it's slow. I think we forget that sometimes, and because we have our own wishes and wants and for our children, we forget how slow these things can come into place. So the prefrontal cortex, where I say the conductor lives, or the CEO, or GPS, this part of the brain, and I always touch my head, I think that's really important too, to show them where it is. It's the last part of the brain to develop. So they now know it's not really fully developed till around the age of 25. So as the brain is developing and more pressures are being put on them to kind of perform these tasks, it can be really difficult. It can be difficult for adults that have been practicing this for a very long time, well past the age of 25. Let's just say 51. It's always there. I also like to point out that these executive skills, everyone has strengths and weaknesses, everybody. Of course, the clients that I work with, is their executive skills to access them consistently is impacted with, as I always point out, dopamine. So because they can't have enough dopamine kind of hanging around, the receptors are picking up really quickly. They're not able to focus on what's important. They tend to focus on what's important to them, but they can't figure out what they need to do. So it makes it more difficult for them to access those skills. But even they have strengths and weaknesses. The good news is that these skills are learned through modeling, being explicitly taught. They're learned through real life experiences. I often wish we could go back to more free and open time and free and open play in school. It tends to get restricted because that's where a lot of executive skills are developed, through imaginary play, through developing a game together, because they have to learn planning and prioritization. They have to learn kind of flexibility, all those skills that are needed to plan a game. They are getting that. And all these skills also strengthen with practice. And during day 2 of this pandemic and learning from home, your kids are going to get lots of practice. So the other point I want to make about executive skills and supporting your child is knowing that they need the practice. They also need to fail, but they don't need to fail so much that they need to fail enough so that they can learn that they can fix, and that they can learn from their mistakes. That's that metacognition. So you've got to give your child enough support to where they are. And then as they strengthen the skill, slowly pull back or scaffold that support. Because ultimately what you want them to do is to take them on and to feel empowered and have them use the tools and the strategies that you're helping them with right now. Okay, so the stuff that I'm going to share with you about online learning, I was going to touch on schedule, and I put the executive skills that are kind of being used when you're creating a schedule. I'm also going to talk about creating a space in your home, how to use rewards and motivation. And then at the very end, I'm going to talk about coaching language. These are just there so you can kind of see what's being used, and I'll help you with some of how you can encourage that and model that for your child. Schedules are so important. This is how teachers can handle 20 to 30 kids in a classroom all at one time, going in all different directions with one goal of learning, whatever that is for them. So you're being asked to do this at home in a learning environment, and you're not teachers, you're parents. So there's going to be some frustration, but one of the best tools you can use is a schedule. Parts of creating a schedule, things that you can do with it is help define expectations. Oftentimes we'll just make a schedule and put times in there without defining expectations. And what I mean by that is when you make a schedule, putting in there what's independent time and what's time to work with you or with a sibling or with a friend online, kind of identifying that for your child, because that can be really hard and difficult. Also, within a schedule, identifying who's available to help at what time. So if a child is in math and maybe that's on their schedule and they can see it, is it mom and dad that can help, or an older brother or sister? Or is there a link to reach out to their teacher? You know, developmentally, whatever is appropriate. Also in the schedule, I suggest using timers to help them manage that. And I'll go a little bit more into that. It's important to honor the need for breaks. I'll go into brainstorming those, what they can do with it, but actually put what they can do instead of just break, have a couple of different options they can do during that time. The last part, the last two things. So also condensing resources, I'm going to show you a little bit about that so that there's one document where they can click on links, because oftentimes the teachers have different ways of communicating. So they might have Google Classroom and Canvas and Flipgrid and all these other things. So I do suggest putting all the links on one schedule, digital schedule, but I'll go more into that. And then the last is building in rewards. So here are just some examples. This was one I just pulled off the internet to show you just this is like a basic. It does say here like break. It tells where everything is and what's going on. This is for a couple of different kids, and that might be what's going on in your household. And this is just an example, a whiteboard, a piece of paper, someplace where everyone can see it is I recommend. The next one I'm going to show you is what I like to use for the older students is a digital. I give them, this is actually one of my clients. That's why the colors are there. They pick those colors. Normally I wouldn't suggest all those colors because it could be distracting, but they made this independently, and so I wanted to honor that. You'll notice that there's a time frame in here, what the class is, and then there are links to, if you would click on that, it goes to exactly where they need to be. And that's has proven to be really beneficial for my clients. The other thing I wanted to put in here is this accountability piece and what that means and what it looks like. I develop that with my clients, and you can develop that with your child. And accountability would be, well, how am I going to know you turn that in? How are you going to know it's done? Whatever that looks like, let them be a part of that process, and then you stick to it, and then you, so they can clearly see. It also gives them a little bit of a boost, like, oh, I can check this off that I did it. I'm going to go on to the next one. Sometimes kids really need the visual schedules with a visual clock. I think that can be very beneficial so they can actually see what's happening and what should be expected of them. There are a lot of great visual schedule that are for free now online where you can go and you can create these, which I love, and I put a link to a resource for that. This is an independent working plan, and these are ones that some of my clients have used when they're really working on homework. In the old days when they had homework, now everything is homework. But I also like this kind of planner, like if it's broken down to task when they're doing asynchronous learning. So what is the task, exactly what it is they have to do, links and supplies that they need. Right here to help them with time management is how long they think something will take, and then how long it took. That helps them to understand, because a lot of times they'll think something's going to take a really long time, and it doesn't. And then it also helps them to realize that sometimes they're like, oh, that'll be 30 minutes, and it takes an hour. And this is going to help to build that executive skill of time management. The other thing is the accountability. Was it turned in? And then I always add the reward part of what do they get once they've completed that task. And this one, they had a couple of different things they could choose from. Okay. Again, with the schedule, I suggest creating it with your child. So the younger the child, you're going to want more in place before you get there and have choices. Like, you get to choose the break. Where do you want to put them? Here are some of your options. There's 3, choose one. With an older child, or kind of in between, like middle school, you would create it with them. And then with a high school student, you might have to do some of the work, but see what they come up with first, and then tweak it to make sure that it has enough support for them that they can utilize it in a good way. The next part is creating space in your home. Again, you're going to be building a lot of wonderful executive skills with this as well, because with collaborating with your child, you're giving them choice. So they're getting to practice how they kind of prioritize what's important to their learning. They're learning about organization. They're learning about what strategies need to be in place for that response inhibition. So, less distraction. I also think it's important to have more than one space if possible. It'd be hard in my house. I have a teeny tiny house, but if to have more than one space to work, so maybe they're on a dining room table, but then they could also work maybe on the floor of the living room. Just to have two spaces can be really helpful in case something unexpected happens, and they can use that flexibility to move. Another thing about creating space is you can use it as reward and motivation. I'm going to go into that a little bit about that. Also think about creating space for movement and for breaks. This can be really helpful throughout the day. They are not moving as much as they normally do. And so this can be really hard and cause boredom. They're not getting that input and that stimulus, so they can start seeking it in other ways that maybe aren't very beneficial. And it can make it difficult to access those executive skills that they need. Also be really cognizant of having everything readily available and that they know where everything is. That's another great thing for them to be a part of. How is it going to be stored? How are they going to put it back? Going over all those steps with them. Also having a timer and a clock. I'm a huge advocate of that to help with time management. And then making it as creative as possible. So here's some examples. Y'all might have seen this out in the world. I know I've seen a lot of it, as using the trifold for science fair projects. And that gives them kind of their own little safe space. And especially if you have more than one child at home working, it kind of, can section off even a dining room table. What I love about this and what I'm going to point out is that there's a place for everything, which is really important because that helps them to organize, and they're seeing that being modeled. So you'll notice that there's a place for their schedule. They actually have a calendar up there. There's a place for their supplies. This is a great setup. I love it. You might want to consider something like this. The other suggestion I have is getting creative. So I did tell one parent this, and I thought they were like, there's no way, I can't deal with that. That's too much mess. But having creative spaces for them to work asynchronous when it's an asynchronous day would be wonderful. You could also use it as a reward. Wow, if you can, when you get through this, then you can go be in your fort or whatever that is. I do have one client now that the weather's getting better, that they're working outside in a tent. This is an older student that can handle that responsibility. And there was a lot of framing around that. And he planned it and created accountability around it. So these are just some creative ideas. I couldn't find one about having a place for movement, like having, if you have a yoga ball or any kind of activity that they can do inside or outside, a space specifically to go for physical activity, or a space specifically to go for chilling out, which these might be a really great spot too. Again, involving your children as much as possible and using the coaching language, which I'm going to go over at the end of this presentation, that helps to build those skills. Okay, now for rewards and motivation. This is from Jody's part of her training. I like to put this in here because I think we forget what's really needed for motivation. Not everyone has that intrinsic ability to want to work through a really difficult problem and to get to the other side of it. And it's not because there's anything wrong with them or that they're lazy or they're not, well, I'd say not motivated enough, but typically there's some stuff going on with dopamine. And dopamine helps us with motivation. It helps us to focus on what's important. What I like about Jody's model, if we start with the goal, breaking it down into action steps so it's attainable. So that's planning and prioritization. And then if you'll notice, she builds in the reward. So right after they finish one part of it, they get this instant dopamine, I don't know, rush. Immediately, it's what they do in video games. And then they are feeling more self-confident. And so then when they go to set their goals, they're going to be more realistic and they're going to come at them from a shifted perspective. And so it's going to just keep going around and around. If you look over here, she breaks it down. Once you get that going, you have progress, then you have some success. That in and of itself is going to give you dopamine. So in the beginning, you might need to start with external reward, and then eventually it's going to shift over to that success as being the reward in and of itself. This is paramount. I had a really hard time when I started this work because I was a big fan of Alfie Kahn, who I still love. He wrote a book called Punished by Rewards. And I loved his work, loved it, loved it. But what I realized, and when I learned more about the brain, is that sometimes we need those external rewards, especially right now, because we're being asked to do extraordinary things. This is not ordinary. This is out of the ordinary. So I would like for you to consider that for your child in thinking about rewards as a way to acknowledge their work. I'm going to go up here. So with rewards, it's really important to brainstorm with your child, but also have your hard nose ready to go. Know what you're willing to make exceptions with, and come with some that you already have in mind, because sometimes they won't be able to generate that on their own. Also with rewards, it's important to set boundaries and with the expectations, because you want to make sure that you're able to give the reward and it's able to happen the way that you say it's going to happen, so that you don't get, but you said I could do this. You know, you gotta set those boundaries. I'm also a big fan of putting them into the schedule. So if they have a task they're trying to achieve, what is the reward going to be? I have some suggestions. It's really hard. Almost 100% of my clients want screen time. They're in front of a screen all day long, which is unusual, because before I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's cool. But it's pretty hard when they're in front of a screen all day. I will tell you that it's a way a lot of them are communicating. They do get a lot of dopamine from it. The game creators are really brilliant that way. Every family is different, but with these suggestions, I tried to think of something a little bit outside of the box of that. Staying up later, but again, that's where you would have the boundary. Planning a special meal where they get to choose what everyone eats. Same with planning activities for the weekend. Choosing a family movie. Again, you'll notice this is all about being independent and giving them choice and having them feel in control. That can be very rewarding. This one, one of my clients slept outside. That's what they wanted to do, so I put that on there. I don't know how adventurous you are, or if you even have enough outside to sleep on. Working outside of the house, there's a get out of chore card. So if once this gets done, then you don't have to take the trash out that night. Screen time, I threw it in there. Working towards a bigger goal. So sometimes you can say, hey, if you get this done, then this is going to get you closer to that big thing that you want, whatever that is for you and for your family. Another one is sitting in a special chair. So if there's a special chair in the house or a special place in the house, that can be rewarding. Picking a family game to play. And then I always think it's great to really, they need practice. So kind of having a free space. So they might have a list, but then they get to choose whatever that is. And it might be screen time. So that's a big hit. That can be a big one where they feel like they're really, really in control of what happens during that time. Let's see here. Okay. wanted to go over coaching language and how I work, because this is really how the skills get built. In what I was talking about, the language before and using the terms of what the executive skills are, and also you're modeling that metacognition, that thinking process of reflecting and figuring out the next steps. So I put in here kind of how it works. So typically you're getting involved when things might not be going well. When things are going well, you're probably not involved when they're doing it independently. So that's the place I'm coming from. So it's acknowledging, that's where you have to start, is acknowledging wherever they are. Even if it's hard to do, you know, just like, wow, I see you've got a lot due tomorrow. And on the inside of your head, you might be like, oh my gosh, how'd you let it get this far? But you've got to stay calm and just acknowledge, you know, that must be stressful, you know? And then the last part's really key, but I know you can get through it. You want to acknowledge where they are, but you also want to acknowledge that they can get through and over this. Really, really important. I am going to put in a huge caveat. If your child is emotionally dysregulated, this is not the time to practice coaching language. This is not the time to try to move forward or to problem solve. They are in this heightened sense and state, and there's so much cortisol going on. They're so tense. They're like wanting to fight, freeze, and I say fib, because oftentimes they'll try to lie to get out of what's happening. This is not a place of problem solving. You need to give them space. This scenario that I'm giving you right now is after they've calmed down and they can problem solve. I will say about that emotional response, one way to build it is to say to them, you know, when you don't do this when they're upset. When they're calm, you say, I noticed when you were upset, I thought maybe we can brainstorm some ways that you could calm down. So that the next time you get upset, because you will, we all do, you'll have some choices that are good for you and don't hurt yourself or hurt anyone else. And they're within the rules of our house. I strongly suggest that. So let's just say we're back in our normal situation. The next step is to notice any small step forward. So even though things are a mess, that it's up to the last, there's tons of work to do. You know what I did notice was that you've planned some of the assignment by breaking it into steps. So you've done some planning. Again, I'm using that executive skill language. That again goes back to that model of they've had some success and they just need that acknowledged. And then after that, you just want to be curious. Try to stay curious. Try not to solve it for them. That's how they're going to practice. Try not to solve it for them. The question could be, so what do you need to get the first step done? What do you need? It could be, what's getting in the way of you getting the first step done? Maybe just talking about it was what they needed. They needed that emotional release. You don't know until you ask the questions. Then you want to say, once they kind of figure out what's there, you want to talk about, well, what could get in the way of you getting started? You're kind of troubleshooting anything else that might get in their way so that they can have some solutions before they even get started. And then you offer your support. So what can I do to help? Maybe they might say, well, I want to get started in 30 minutes after I watch a Quibi or whatever. Okay, great. What can I do to make sure how can I help you make sure you get started? Whatever it is, but always offer support, because you want to show them that you know they can do it on their own. And then last, a great question to ask is, you know, this is kind of tough. What are you going to do for a little bit of a reward, or what are you going to do to celebrate once you get through this? Because this is pretty big, and I know it's going to be hard. That's another place where you can have brainstorm rewards for those types of things too, so they can have a list to choose from, because it can be hard when they're under pressure to think of ways to reward themselves. Um, Lastly, I live from a place of powerful questions. This is what I do all the time. As parents, as teachers, we often want to go in and we want to help fix it, or we want to do it for them. I'm hoping by sharing these questions with you, you can think about support in a little bit different way to help your child grow these skills and to give them a chance to figure things out on their own. So I have 2 pages of them. I don't want to read them to you, but I'll go over some specifically with certain skills. When you're doing time management, I'm going to go back to always asking, how long do you think that's going to take? And then saying to them, you know, I'm just curious, how long do you think this is going to take? And why don't we time and get some data and see how long it really takes? So you're helping them build that skill. Another way for sustained attention is using that question as well, saying, you know, I know that reading can be really hard. It's hard to focus. I'm wondering if you could make it 10 minutes of sustained reading. What do you think? Those types of questions aren't as directive. You're giving your child a choice. They're having to think about it. And then they're specifically, you know, you need to sustain that attention to read. Can you do it for 10 minutes? And then they're linking what they're doing to that skill. Another part, let's see, another big thing is you don't always know, they don't tell you. So asking, hey, of this assignment, what are you most concerned about? And that might be the part where you can actually go and help. Well, yeah, that part's kind of help. Who would you need to help you with that? That really helps them break it down, because it could be a small thing that's getting in the way, but to them, it's really, really big. So by asking that question, they're getting to practice what exactly it is. It's that metacognition skill. Let's see, I always like this one for parents, like when their kids are getting ready for homework or for work. So what are you going to do first? Again, you're modeling, planning, and prioritization. What's your priority? It's another thing. And then ask them, so I'm just curious, what made you pick that? And make them reflect on, you're not making them, but asking them to reflect on why they picked that. I'm going to go on to the next one. These are just some sample questions. There's a lot out there. You can even put in powerful coaching questions for students, and you should be able to get a good amount of questions. Another thing is, especially for the teenagers, they're really wanting independence. They want their parents off their back, and you want that because that means they're psychologically developing in that way. So they still need accountability. Remember, they need, I'm asking you to support them and to gradually let go. So some high school students still need that accountability. So some questions for that is, how will you let me know you completed the task? So then they actually feel like they have some choice in it, rather than saying, you have to come sit down and show me. Let them come up with the way they're going to do it. Another one, who else do you need to communicate that with? That's a really great one, because they then have to think about, oh yeah, I probably should email my teacher and let them know that's going to be late. Or I need to let my friend know that I can't meet them. I should probably text them. Stuff like that for that accountability piece, but you're asking them how to do it, rather than saying, well, I'm going to email the teacher and let her know it's going to be late. Or I'm going to text so-and-so's mom and say, you can't make it. Although I will say sometimes they might say, yeah, I don't want to text them. Could you text them for me? That's fine too, but let that be their choice. So another one for response inhibition and for sustained attention too, what could be, when you're planning the room or the space, what could potentially be distracting to you? Oftentimes parents will take out distracting things, but not go through the thinking process. So by asking them, they're like, oh, I don't see anything in here that could be distracting. Then you can say, well, I'm just curious. What about, I've seen you play with that a lot before when you were on that Zoom meeting. How often do you think that's happening? And then you can create curiosity for your child to start looking at that rather than you having to monitor it. Another part is, so when it comes to reward setting, asking, what do you think is a reasonable amount to spend on your phone, a reasonable amount of time? You've got to be okay with whatever answer they give. I'm not saying that's what has to happen, but just know, say, wow, that's a lot of time. I'm just curious, how did you come up with that? Have you ever tracked it before? Those types of things. You're just trying to get them to start bringing awareness to this stuff rather than you having to say, you know, you spend 4 hours on the phone. Whatever it is that happens at your house, pushing it back on them, making them think about it. Anyway, so I'm not gonna, I think that's, oh, here's another one I think is really good. If they're in a spot, and this happens a lot, I don't know. Well, what do you think you should do next? I have no idea. And that might really be where they are in that moment. And that's okay. Yeah, I affirm. I hear that. I get that way sometimes. Would you like some suggestions? Would you like, would you like to hear what I've seen you do in the past to maybe get your memory going? So you acknowledge that they're stuck, but you offer suggestions. This is better than jumping in and saying, well, this is what I think you should do. Again, you're putting it back on them and them having to think about it a little bit. And it also gives you a way to model that thinking. Well, this happens to me, and sometimes suggestions help me. Would you like to, for some suggestions? Be prepared, because they might say no. But still, you're at least allowing that space to be open and to be there for them. Okay, one more. So and this is the last one. So another great thing when they're setting out to do work is to have them visualize or picture what it will feel like for all of it to be done. Again, that's that planning and prioritization, but it's also them setting the reward so they can have that goal persistence. Oh, it's going to feel so great. I'm not going to have so much pressure. This would be a great time to share with them too. Yeah, I felt that way. I mean, I can even say for this tonight, if I had a child, I could be like, you know, I was like really looking forward to the presentation being over because I was kind of nervous. I wanted to do a good job and I was really tense. And I just pictured myself after the presentation, just sitting down and relaxing and watching blah, 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 whatever that is. I'm modeling for them what I do, how I help myself to get through something when I'm feeling overwhelmed. And that's a really great one to use. Yeah, so that's some coaching language to help. At the end, I put here all the resources for you, some really great times. I kept talking about timers. Here's some digital ones. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, you know, ADHD happens to be in my wheelhouse, and there's a really great video. She does an incredible job with these videos, and my clients will tell me it's the first time they felt really understood. So I just am sharing that if that ADHD happens to be something that you are familiar with or need help with. And that's it. I don't know how long I went.
No, this is perfect. We have 10 minutes here to do questions.
Okay, good. My time management, I was a little nervous.
And no, perfect. It was perfect. So we did get quite a few questions here in the chat that we want to share with you. I do want to point out that this deck and the recording of this presentation will be available on the website. We'll put the link to that in the chat itself. Heather, I took a few notes.
Okay.
As I was going through and just thinking through some of these great points that you made here, the that check-in. So if we had the, you know, how long do you think it will take? And then that reflection, it took 1 hour and 23 minutes. I can definitely see this working for a lot of kids. Be able, because that's such an overwhelming feeling. I'm guilty of it at work when you have to think about this huge project you have to do. And I love like the creative skills, doing that tent on Monday, you know, asynchronous work, giving them that space to really, I think that will work great for younger kids as well as some of the older kids.
Yeah.
An area just to chill for the day. And I love the idea of putting the reward into the schedule, because I am definitely guilty of saying, we're going to do that this weekend. And then this weekend comes.
Yeah.
And sometimes we haven't built it into the schedule appropriately.
Yeah.
And mom's got to rewind. So
yeah.
I like that reminder. And so thank you for all of this. And I know Allison has a list of the questions here.
Okay. Thank you.
We have some really great questions. You know, I love this one. It's just like gets to really the basics. As you mentioned, the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until 25. As a coach, how do you determine what is a normal development versus someone who needs additional supports or coaching?
So wherever anyone is exactly where they're supposed to be. So I'm going to start by there. How I know if they need additional support or coaching, whether they have ADHD or they're on the spectrum, just like any of that, is if they're unable to successfully reach their goal consistently. I always use consistently. So it's whenever a student is like going along and everything is great, and then they go shook, and then they come back up, and then shook and back up. They need support. There's some lagging skills. There's some coaching that's needed. There's something that's not in place, because it should look more like this. I mean, there's going to be some big spills. We all have big spills, but it's going to be more like this, and then maybe bloop. And so if there's these big, huge things, then that's when you know someone needs more support than just kind of doing it on their own, getting it on their own.
Okay. Let's see. Next question is, I have a third grader that just started virtual school. He shows some symptoms of ADHD. My question relates to how to help him with school. He resists joining classes and has been having meltdowns during the virtual school day, saying that he does not want to do school and does not want to rejoin class if he has had a 5 to 10 minute break. How can I motivate him or help him to stay in or with the school day?
Yeah, that's really, really hard, because what's happening there too is the emotional dysregulation. And then, so just dealing with that with frustration, it's going to start to heighten everything. So brainstorming with him before, you know, it may be over this weekend. You can sit down. I can see this is really hard. That would be hard for me to sit that long all day long. Let's brainstorm some ways that can make this better for you. I'll help you with this. I want to be there for you to help you get through this. I know you can do it. It's really hard. Keep telling him he can do it. And then brainstorm some of the ideas. One thing that I know that is noticed that has helped, I don't know what the school policy is. Some students don't like seeing themselves. It's very dysregulating. So being able to turn your camera off, I know some schools don't allow that, but maybe that might be one of the things that you can negotiate with the school and with him. Also standing up, because having to sit for that long a period of time without any of that in-person co-regulation with another human close to you can also dysregulate. So even standing up or working near you when he's working can be helpful. Those are just some ideas, and you can brainstorm with him and try to get to what it is that's really throwing him off. The whole nother thing that's happening is when he disengages and goes for a break. That is a skill of having to, it's that response inhibition, because he's enjoying the break so much, and then having to be flexible and then switch around and go back to this thing that he really truly wants to avoid. So first, acknowledging that this is a really great time. I know you really like your break and you're having a hard time getting in there. I noticed it's only to be 30 minutes or 45, hopefully it's not 45 minutes, I don't know. I shouldn't say that, but whatever it is for third grade, like 30 minutes or whatever in this class, what can we put out here that can make it worth it you staying in there? That's where the rewards can really be helpful, because that's really hard to do and it's hard for you. So what can we do to celebrate at the end? Because then he'll see, if I do this, then I'll get that, because the reward is not coming from being in that class. So yeah, so that's a whole nother thing that's going on. Again, breaking it down into small chunks rather than the great big huge thing. You just have to get through this class right now. Then we're going to celebrate. Keeping it focused on the moment rather than, because he's just thinking about the whole entire day. I have to do this again. So those are my suggestions.
That's great. Another question, how would you adapt some of this for younger children, age 7 maybe? Specifically asking regarding coaching language examples, which some I can see working, but still very reliant on parents.
Yeah, I think that when working with younger children, you need to give choice. So you're actually going to be, it's going to be a little bit more directive. I'm so glad that you chose that question to ask, because I meant to address that in the presentation. So for example, you know, if you're looking at a task, you might say to your child about the task, you might just say, well, you could get started here or here. Where do you want to get started? So one, they're seeing you modeling the thinking process, but you've broken it down into really manageable chunks for them, and then they get to practice the choosing. I hope that's helpful. I can't go back into my questions so I can rearrange some of the other ones. When you get finished with that task, we need to celebrate. You can have this or this. Again, what could get in your way, that's a pretty big heady one for a 7-year-old, but you can say, you've got to take out the trash. What might you want to do other than take out the trash? So kind of rephrasing it more specifically rather than broad. As specific as you can get is going to be helpful.
Okay. Let's see, I'll try to do a couple more. Let's see, I've tried some questions before, and my kid doesn't always want to discuss it. Quote, yeah. I've got it under control, but they really don't.
Right. Got a great question. I hear that you have it under control. That's great. What is your measurement for that? What's the evidence for that? That's another great question. I hear that you have it under control. That's really great. I love that. How am I going to know that whatever this thing is under control? You can also use evidence in the past, because I know sometimes you felt that way, which makes complete sense. I've felt that way before, like I'm in control, and then things can happen and kind of derail you, and the best of intentions don't happen, and then you and I get into this. So I want to avoid that. So how can you show me that you really have it under control? What are some markers? I just threw a bunch of stuff out there. I wouldn't do all of that talking at that time, but breaking stuff like that up. What's the evidence?
Great. Let's see. My 10th grader is having difficulty taking notes while the teacher is speaking. Yeah. She says she can only do one thing at a time, listen or write. Do you have any tips for her to try?
Well, the great thing about online learning, I actually have a student doing it. I know that I don't think they can record class. Like I know that's sometimes an option. If they have access to technology to be able to record it from a phone, I'll often suggest just knowing that they just need to listen in that moment, and then they can go back and listen. If they have accommodations, you might want to consider having access to notes beforehand. So then they can print out the notes and preview what's going to happen, which allows them to have access to the information so that when they're listening, it's going to have a better chance of what I say sticking. Also, you can get an accommodation. well, I shouldn't say that because I don't know for sure, but of getting a recording of the class. For note taking, that's really, really tricky. If a teacher's doing a presentation, I always suggest having a copy of the presentation so that they can look at it and maybe write 1 or 2 words afterwards. That's what I would suggest. It is really, really difficult. If they're an auditory learner, I do suggest just really focusing on listening that first time around, and then they're going to have to go back, which they don't like doing, they hate doing, but it is good for their brain, going back and kind of filling in and getting the notes and reviewing that way.
So we've officially hit 9 o'clock.
Okay. Yeah.
Kathleen, do you have any questions that you really wanted to hit?
No, you know, there's a few more questions in here, Heather. Would you mind if we sent those to you and we could send those back to those parents?
Absolutely. And I put my link there to my website. So if you want to, there's a contact form in there. I think pretty sure my email's on there. But if you have any questions, you can just do the contact form too. Just know I put myself on there as a resource. And we're in a very extraordinary time. And so, you know, I really would like to be there as much as I can for everyone. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This was a great presentation.
Oh, good.
And I just want to let everybody know that you can find the slides for this presentation. And once this meeting is over, we'll post the link to the video on our website, and it'll be the first post in the blog. So you'll be able to find all this, and I'll also post answers to the questions that we didn't get to.
Sorry, one last point. I did just see in here, Heather, on the page that have the active links to resources, the final 3 may not be working.
Okay.
That.
Thank you for letting me know.
Somebody just said the first 4 links work great, but the last 3 links on the final page of the presentation with active links are not working correctly.
Thank you.
Okay.
I will fix my mistake and I'll send you a new one.
Fantastic. Thanks.
So with that, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much, Heather. This was great.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.